The affirmative defends the concept of mental continuity across species, causal reasoning. Although animals don't have full causal reasoning, they have precursors to it. This is evidence of continuity. Dr. David Primack, 2007. When adults perceive two events that are temporally and spatially contiguous, they see the first event as having causes the second. The causal illusion is an automatic reaction and precursor of reasoning. An animal may recognize that a large rock is more likely to break a branch than a small one, but if the animal observes a large rock lying by a crushed plant, will it infer that the rock crushed the plant? This understanding of physical action is not the equivalent of causal reasoning. It is of interest to compare the case of teaching that will, with that causal reasoning. The animal version of causality may well be a precursor of the human version. Both humans and animals share causal illusion mechanisms that can be forerunners of causal reasoning. Next, cooking. New study suggests chimps have brain power in planning to cook their own food. Hamilton 15. A new study is the first to show that animals can acquire a cooking-like skill on their own. First, the researchers gave the chimp a device that appeared to work like an oven. After providing the oven, Rosati and Workman gave the chimp sliced of uncooked white sweet potato. About half the chimps became regular users of the oven, and those chimps pretty much ignored a second device that returned their food uncooked. The results add to a debate about whether early humans had the brain power to figure out cooking, an activity that requires planning, a willingness to delay gratification, and sophisticated use of the tool. The study also offers a reminder that very few behaviors are uniquely human. The chimps are surprisingly similar to humans, and even though the whole process of cooking seems like something that is a huge divide between humans and other animals. Next, chimps possess the intellectual capabilities humans require for cooking. Devlin 15. Chimpanzees possess most of the intellectual abilities required for cooking. A study found that chimpanzees prefer the taste of cooked food, can defer gratification while waiting for it, and even choose to hoard raw vegetables if they know that they will have the chance to cook them later on. The transition to cooked food is widely viewed as an important evolutionary milestone because it would have allowed our primitive forebears to expand their diet and extract far more calories. Previously, the suite of intellectual abilities required to make the leap to prepare cooked food had been widely thought to be limited to humans, which wild-born chimpanzees were given the opportunity to prepare food using a cooking device. Overall, the apes chose to cook potato nearly 90% of the time when given a straight choice, when they were nearly as keen when they had to wait 1 minute while it was cooked by the researcher. In a final display of self-control, about half the chimps chose to hoard raw potato when they knew that they would be presented with the option of cooking it later on. The more we study our primate cousins, the more we realize that the basis of our most of our cognitive abilities, including for language, culture, and fairness. Next, chimps chose to use various tools, including cooking devices. Lemonic 15. Among many, many other chimp skills, primatologists have learned that our closest of evolutionary cousins fashion spears to hunt for prey, trade food for sex, play with dolls, and don't take kindly to drones invading their space. The latest discovery: chimps have all the cognitive abilities necessary for the uniquely human behavior of cooking. Chimps' brains are pretty much fully equipped to take the great culinary leap our direct human ancestors did in the dim past. The mental processes involved in cooking are far too complex to be tested in a single experiment. Felix Workman, a Harvard psychologist, did 9 separate experiments to assess different aspects of cooking-related thinking. Given that chimpanzees are the most patient of creatures, is that another impressive finding, given that chimps are the most patient of creatures, is that they will choose not to eat a chunk of raw potato immediately, deferring gratification for the time it takes to cook the food. Chimpanzees may have cognitive precursors to cooking even though they don't cook themselves, so now we can scratch one more item off the list of abilities that are uniquely human. Next, empathy. Countless examples of animals exhibiting empathy prove that they have it. Naysayers just arbitrarily define empathy in twisted ways. Worrell 2015. Elephants routinely display empathy. I've always been touched by their bonds and been impressed by their emotions. Life is very vivid to animals. They know who their friends are and who their rivals are. If you're having a mental experience, you're conscious. Animals do. If you watch mammals, you will see how they respond to the world. They act frightened when there's danger. They relax when things are good. Many animals express empathy for one another. There are documented stories of elephants finding people who are lost. People have seen humpback whales help seals from being hunted by killer whales. They have been doing these kinds of things for millions of years. I'm now ready for cross-examination.
All right. Okay. So you were talking about empathy towards the end, and you mentioned, a lot of anecdotal evidence. Do you have any scientific data to prove that animals feel empathy?
Not in this specific card, but yes.
Will you be doing it in subsequent cards? Will you provide evidence for it?
We can find one, yeah.
All right, I'll be waiting for that. In regards to mimicry, we're going to talk about mimicry for a second. You were talking about how with cooking, with all of that, that this is because they're gaining cognitive abilities to learn how to cook. Do you feel that without human intervention that they would ever gain these abilities whatsoever?
Well, you have to understand, children do the exact same thing. That's how children learn. They imitate what adults do. So just because they're imitating what the researchers are doing doesn't mean that they don't have the same
There was a video I saw recently in my linguistics class, and they compared a 2-year-old to a chimpanzee. And what they did was they did have it go throughout time. Do you think that they have the cognitive abilities of in the same mental state to reach adulthood that many children are able to reach?
Yeah, that's not what we're arguing. We're arguing the term is I apologize, mental continuity. Human mental faculties can be understood as a more advanced or evolved form of mental faculty.
Okay, thank you. Going on to the next question. In your Prima 07 card, you gave an example of a large rock, and right after that, it says that there is no evidence that will happen. So it's specifically in the same card. So
so basically what this card is saying, it can be very easily misconstrued, but this card is trying to say that animals have precursors to causal reasoning, not that they have causal reasoning now. So it's like comparing them to young infants, basically, because young infants have this thing called causal illusion, and so that's what the animals have.
So they don't necessarily have it. Yes.
Not yet, but that's what the card is saying. They have precursors to it.
Do you think mimicry is a direct has a direct correlation with cognitive ability?
Mimicry?
Yeah, mimicry. So, for example, if a human does something and an ape does that. Well,
that's fine.
The order is K, then case. Anyone not ready? Okay, debating this topic is only bringing all other creatures beside humans to a less animalistic standing, which is harmful to how we view the importance of how humanity ties into all other animals just as much as they do to us. The only reason why we are even debating this is because we live in a world that allows for this type of attack on creatures that view humanity as superior, that only people are people. We must get to the root of this issue before even being able to debate mental continuity. The act must be able to answer for why we even consider other animals to be below us, Homo sapiens, when we ourselves are animals as well. The app is so shifty of a position, and they can change it to fit whatever animals they need it to be, making this framework much too broad for the neg to effectively cover. Now, going on to the case. Darwin was wrong. There are fundamental discontinuity between animal and human minds that are different in kind, not degree. Humans have unique higher order reasoning that is not solely due to language or culture. Only humans can reason inferently and use systematic structure. The apt author relied only on contrived and narrow conception of continuity to inflate the importance of similarity. Pen 08. The dominant tendency in the comparative cognitive psychology has been to emphasize the continuity between humans and non-humans' mind and to downplay the differences. Nearly everyone agrees that there is something uniquely human about our ability to represent and reason about our own and other mental state. And most linguists argue that there is a fundamental discontinuity between human and non-human forms of communication. The trend among comparative researchers is to construe the uniquely human aspects for these faculties in increasingly narrow terms. Notwithstanding, the broad comparative consensus arrayed against us. Darwin was mistaken. The profound biological continuity between human and non-human animals marks an equally profound functional discontinuity between the human and non-human mind. The functional discontinuity pervades nearly every domain of cognition, from reasoning about spatial relations to deceiving specifics, and run much deeper than language or culture. Now, going on to their cooking argument. Studies shows that chimps prefer to cook food and are willing to wait for it. Akron 05. A new study shows that our closest primate relatives possess some of the mental skills required to cook and appreciate prepared dishes. Cooking requires the premeditation of gathering ingredients and the subsequent patience of tailoring a meal rather than immediately consuming this raw element. Using a batch of 9 challenges, Ronikin and Rosati tested chimpanzees' cognitive capabilities towards cooking, namely motivation, patience, and casual understanding of prepared food and planning. Chimps prefer cooked food. Prior research had shown the same, but this experiment serves as a foundation for the more nuanced trials. The research had allowed 23 chimps to choose between food prepared with and without cooking. The apes preferred the latter 87% of the time. Mark at that time, and go on to the next evidence. Next part. The app's own evidence states that chimps can cook for specific reasons, so these mental capabilities will never be fully developed. Waniken and Rosati 15. If chimps possess a set of fundamental psychological capabilities for cooking, why do wild chimps not actually cook their own food? One obvious reason is that chimpanzees do not control fire. Second, human cooking is generally social in nature. social tolerance may have been necessary for cooking to evolve. Chimpanzees may be unwilling to engage in these behaviors when multiple chimps have access to food and cooking device, monopolizing rather than sharing these resources. Mark had the resources and now going on to their causal reasoning part. Animals do not have causal reasoning. Derek et al. 07. Many aspects of both humans and non-humans causal learning are parsimoniously explained in terms of some forms of associative conditioning. This implies that causal induction is not simply reducible to contingency learning. Even non-human animals employ cognitive mechanisms that distinguish between causality and covariation. There is still no convincing evidence that non-human animals of any tags seek out explanation of causal relations or use their own intervention in order to elucidate ambiguous causal dependency. Mark that causal dependency. Now going on to the empathy part. Animal empathy is impossible to prove. Not even the most advanced studies involve some selfish motivation. Brian 16. Pegg and Mason were finding that when one rat was placed near another jail rat, the free rat would open the hatch for a rescue. This study was a breakthrough. Alex Kaelie, a behavioral ecologist, argued that Mason was simply projecting human-like feelings onto these rat rescues, a tendency known as anthropomorphism. We don't have evidence that there is an internal first-person experience that leads the animal to do it. Mark card at 8, and I'm now ready for cross-examination.
Do we have time? What's our time?
I'm ready for cross-ex.
Alright, to start off, can you define mental continuity?
It's, to my knowledge and to my own words, it's saying that there is similarity between the mental stages of human and animals, like.
Okay, and
yeah, just like the ability to like consciously be aware and be like, okay, you know, like future planning is a very important aspect to that. Like, you know, and not just like in a survival aspect, sort of like, you know, if like mental continuity is like this happened, I'm going to, you know what I mean?
Okay, but the term as defined in the packet is human mental faculties are different from non-human animal faculties in degree, not kind. Human mental faculties can be understood as a more advanced or evolved form of mental faculties seen in other animals. Could you explain how your argument regarding mental continuity as being an incorrect view of viewing that? Or could you explain your argument regarding the terminology?
Can you rephrase your question?
That was your first argument.
Yeah, it was a key argument.
Can you explain what is wrong with that definition of mental continuity?
Well, basically, we're not talking about the definition of mental continuity. We're just talking about this topic in general. We're critiquing this topic, actually debating this topic because it's degrading the way we see animals. We're not talking about the residential because as NEG, we don't have to be topical. We're just saying this whole system in general is faulty. That's what we're trying to say.
Okay, well, my next question was going to be explain the K, but we covered that a little bit already. So, would you say that defining something as selfish is kind of like a human word? Like, if you define animals as selfish, isn't that also anthropomorphic?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily? Okay. Next. Can we go back to your cooking evidence?
Yeah.
Would you say that cooking is or is not a cognitive capability?
Depends on, so that actually ties to imitation. If they're actually imitating without understanding what they're actually doing, then it's not.
Okay.
Because they can be imitating, but that doesn't necessarily mean they understand what they're doing.
Okay. Are you timing?
No.
Oh, shit. Alright, well, we're just gonna stop.
Okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. First, regarding their mental continuity wrong argument, we are arguing mental continuity as defined in the packet as being human mental faculties are different from non-human animal faculties in degree, not kind. Human mental faculties can be understood as a more advanced or evolved form of mental faculties seen in other animals. The negative's position seems to be that this definition necessarily describes animals as in a degrading terminology, but this is not degrading. This is a fact. Humans can cook. Humans make use of a very sophisticated technology. Humans can communicate through spoken terminology. Humans can provide extremely detailed qualitative and quantitative data about themselves. This is not degrading. These are capabilities that humans possess, not animals. That's the point that this is somehow degrading to argue the existence of mental continuity between animals and humans is inherently false because it's not a degrading thing. It is simply a recognition of the state of reality. Secondly, regarding their cooking argument, extend Lemonic 15. The negative's argument seems to be that it's simply an imitative thing, but it states that chimps understand that cooking is a process, and the key thing here in terms of understanding cooking in the terms of animals is that, one, they prefer cooked food over uncooked food, they delay gratification to receive the cooked food, and they clearly understand it's a process and use the tool to produce the cooked food. Now, once again, we're arguing mental continuity. There's a similarity here. Now, they argue that cooking is a social process for animals, and we argue that this is simply, once again, on a scale between humans and animals. Clearly, that chimps and animals are not currently there at the point as to understanding how cooking could be used as a social process, but seeing as in our Lemonic 15 card, it states that chimps trade food for sex, this is not an ruled out possibility, and there is a spectrum as to which animals and humans understand cooking, and clearly animals do understand cooking to an extent. Regarding their Penn and Povinelli 07 card, extend our Premac 2007 card. We understand that animals do not possess causal reasoning, but once again, we are arguing in terms of mental continuity. There's a spectrum, and we argue that animals possess the precursors to understanding causal reasoning, such as the fact that animals understand that a large rock is more likely to crush a plant than a small rock. And then finally, regarding their Resnick 16 card against our empathetic evidence, the negative simply seems to state that selfish reasons separate empathetic behavior between animals and humans. However, is it not that humans conduct empathetic behavior for selfish reasons as well? Of course, no human would ever conduct empathetic behavior in terms of if they understood that sort of behavior would not only result in negative external effects on them, but also negative internal and emotional effect on them. That behavior would never be undertaken if that was understood. Clearly, all humans take empathetic behavior because they understand it will result in a net positive internally and emotionally for them. Thus, it's not true to state that selfish reasons separate empathetic behavior between animals and humans, because both animals and humans undertake empathetic behavior for selfish reasons. Together, these, regarding cooking, back to cooking, because I have 30 seconds left. Together, these results indicate that chimpanzees and humans share several of the essential psychological capacities needed to cook food. Chimpanzees preferred cooked food over raw foods and were even willing to pay greater temporal costs in order to acquire cooked foods. Chimpanzees further exhibited self-control by giving up food in their own possession in order to transform it by placing it in a novel cooking device. This is taken from the Neg's own Workman and Rosati card. Their argument is based off of the fact that chimps don't control fire or don't use it as a social process, but that isn't the capability you're evaluating. Thank you. And now I'm ready for class examination.
Okay.
I'm gonna start with the last sentence you said. So you said that our argument was based on the fact that animals cannot control fire, but is controlling fire not a process in cooking?
I'm confused.
Is that not a process in cooking? Like, is that no part of the process for cooking? Like the fire? Not
necessarily.
So what do you use in cooking?
We're defining cooking as to using some tool to produce raw food in a cooked food, understanding that this takes time, and understanding that you prefer
No, that's
cooked
not
food to
answering my question. Like,
then what's your question?
Is the fire not a process in cooking?
Our evidence states that chimpanzees understand that it's a process.
Sorry, going on to the next question. in your cooking card, where in that card does it specifically show the process of this cooking? Like, do they just give them the oven? Do the experimenters just give these animals the oven and do they just cook out of the blue, or was there a process to it?
There were 9 different experiments, so it depends on which one you're referencing.
I can just say all of your experiments.
All
like,
of them?
Is there like a specific process to this?
Yeah, so in the one that I think you're referencing, which is the one that's talked about most, the researchers showed that raw food went in, cooked food came out, but they also presented them with multiple options afterwards in different experiments.
Yeah.
They didn't have that process.
I understand that, but one of your specific evidence said that they were given ovens to cook.
Yes.
So, did they just give this animal raw food in the oven and did they just start cooking out of the blue, or was there a process to this? Was there imitation? Did they imitate the experimenters, or what happened in that process?
Yeah, the experimenters would show the chimps what would happen, but as we talked about earlier, it's the same as in children.
Okay, so one last question. Would you say that imitation equals understanding?
No.
We would not say that. But
Thank you. Thank you.
Alright, we're good. Are you guys ready? Alright, good. We're going to start with analogical reasoning. Animals lack analogical reasoning, which is fundamentally human thought. The best evidence comes from a discredited and unreplicated study. This is from Penn 2008. There's a qualitative difference between the kinds of cognitive processes between these two animals. We've been using the ape argument a lot within this. We see that that perceptual features of the constituents play undifferentiated and symmetrical roles in those relations. So we can really see that overall the cognitive abilities between apes and humans are fundamentally different, and that you can't really claim that they have these so-called same abilities that we do to actually make this process happen, because there's been no evidence. You've provided no real evidence towards this. You've provided, anecdotal throughout this entire process. Our analogical reasoning is a fundamental and ubiquitous aspect of human thought. There's not been seen in any other animal except for humans through countless scientific studies. We see that if you guys want to claim your point, there needs to be more extensive series of tests, and that they need to actually examine this evidence more rather than trying to pull circumstantial and anecdotal evidence out of the air. And moving on to empathy. Empathy is a very, very important topic that we need to talk about, that our opponents have very, very, very tried to sneak away from. We see that animal empathy is impossible to prove. Even the most advanced studies involve some selfish motivator. This is from Resnick 16. Peggy Madison found that when one rat was placed near another jailed rat, the free rat would open the hatch for rescue. The study was a breakthrough, but Kasselnick, a behavior ecologist, argued that Mason was projecting human-like feelings onto those rat rescues, a tendency known as anthropomorphism. We don't have evidence that there's an internal first-person experience that leads an animal to do it. Tiny ants can also appear as if they are rescuing other ants, but ants are nearly brainless. The free rat opened the cage for selfish reasons. It liked playing with the other rat. When rats couldn't play with each other, the free rat wasn't as interested in conducting the jailbreak. While it's easy to observe animal behavior, it's near impossible to confirm the motivations behind that behavior. We don't have the scientific capability to determine what was behind that behavior. There's so many possible interpretations of empathetic behavior that all need to be eliminated. There seems to be limits to animal empathy. Cognitive empathy is the ability to think through feelings and weigh options. No researcher would go as far to argue that animals have cognitive empathy. We don't think that this rat weighed through the options of freeing or non-freeing. It didn't seem like it had the capability to think, to itself, was this a good or bad decision? Empathy requires that an individual knowingly act at a cost to itself to aid one another. Our opponent claimed to have scientific data addressing our empathy argument in the cross-examination, but provided no such data, and all he did was just go on further and further and further with his anecdotal evidence. But he claimed, or they claimed, that they had scientific data they would bring up this next time. No scientific data whatsoever. So obviously they've relinquished this argument to us and given us that. So moving forward, we see future planning as an important argument to talk about. None of their evidence proves that animals may have been in a motivational state that was relevant to the action they were performing. This means that they can't definitely prove that the animals can plan for the future. This is from Paxton and Hampton 10. So we're going to talk about future planning and how this is important towards the cognitive ability that we're trying to discuss today. One aspect of these examples of planning is that a need or motivational state is anticipated, although it is not currently experienced. We plan for a meal even though we aren't currently hungry. Although animals do build nests, store foods, and move towards the equator in the winter, there is little reason to believe that these behaviors result from anticipation of the future states of parenthood, hunger, or cold. There have been several recent reports of birds and primates planning for the future. However, the critical component of the Bisher-Kohler hypothesis is that is not addressed by these studies, that true planning requires anticipation of motivational states that are not currently experienced. Although the jays, squirrels, monkeys, and apes altered their current behavior in favor of an outcome that was not immediate, the animals may have been in a motivational state relevant to the goal during the choice phase of the trials. The remarkable thing about humans stockpiling firewood during the summer months is that this behavior is motivated by the anticipation of being cold, not by the experience of it currently being cold. So if the animals felt it starting to get colder and colder and colder, of course they're going to plan for that because that's a natural response of the animals. But humans, we have this special capability to where we can I'm going to bring up a funny example. If there's a sale of candy after Halloween, we're going to buy it. Not because, we're thinking, oh, Halloween's coming up next year. It's because we know about the sale. We know about certain things like that. Animals don't have that same capability that we have to understand, that this is coming in the future. It's because they can feel it. And once they feel it, it's their biology kicking in. It isn't planning for the future. It's just biology taking over. And so these experiments may not explicitly address whether animals made choices. Thank you.
Could you define analogical reasoning? You stated that analogical reasoning is one of the key things that is lacking in animals. Could you define it?
Could you?
Well, I'm asking you.
Analogical reasoning really is stating that when it comes to something, A to B, B to C, C to D. We think that animals only have A to B. They feel cold. They need to get food for the winter because it's going to be cold. They feel cold. They need to go to a warm area. That's A to B. But humans have this ability to go from A to B, B to C, C to D. So it's the ability to make connections and to not have to solely rely on an A to B connection for it to be reasonable.
So is it causal inference by your definition? Is it being able to go from understanding A impacts B, B impacts C? And if so, how do you prove it in humans if it's the defining thing that animals lack and humans possess?
How do we prove it in humans?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's an...
We don't necessarily have to prove it in humans. We just have to show it that animals do not have it because that's...
Exactly. This isn't about humans having the capability. This is about animals. Why don't we stick to the animals?
Well, it does define whether it does matter whether humans possess it or not, because we're arguing that humans and animals exist on the spectrum of mental continuity, and thus, if humans do not possess it, then why does it?
Well, I disagree with that notion, so that's what I'm going to say about that.
Okay. In terms of, you mentioned that there's no empirical evidence in terms of
Yeah, you guys didn't provide
empathy.
any evidence towards empathy whatsoever.
Do you realize that you stated in your own evidence, empirical evidence in terms of empathy, in terms of the...
Well, I asked you to provide scientific evidence, and you said you would provide evidence, and so that burden's not on me, it's on you.
So by saying
but
that,
you said you would provide scientific evidence, and you never did.
But now we understand that there is...
But you never provided scientific evidence whatsoever, so I think that's on you, because you guys said you would. I remember her saying in her speech you would provide scientific evidence, and she never did. Which is unfortunate.
Oh, you want to take this because we can't.
Stop. Talk about your future plan.
This did happen, right?
Oh, they can't do it now because we wouldn't be able to respond to it. Because we would be dropping it. So we're actually going based on that. We should clearly share that. Cards on understanding there's a card, and then also expand the fact that human motivational stuff is different from others. This is how research of course we understand that we are that one's a hard one. Also one, we do have empirical evidence for everything in our lifetime, and it demonstrates that it's not empathetic behavior. Kind of their point was that selfish motivators was the case of humans. That's what the card says. Of course, selfish motivators exist in humans in terms of role playing behavior as well. That's very determining the difference between humans and animals, but act to sort of
Okay. All right. Okay, so to start off, just to kind of counter this future planning argument that was just thrown at us in this last speech, chimpanzees plan to throw rocks at zoo visitors, rock catchers proved, Oswald 09. Report on a decade of observations planning by chimpanzee. Such planning implies advanced consciousness and cognition. On 5 days before the zoo opened, the chimpanzee gathered stones and placed them in cages. Later each day, the stones were used as ammunition during displays. The chimpanzee was observed to gently knock on the concrete rocks to break off the detached service section in pieces. The manufactured missiles were transported to the cages at the shoreline. The observed above described behavior is clearly identifiable as planning for a future state. The gathering and manufacturing has only been observed during the hours before the zoo opened, excluding potential triggering from presence of zoo visitors. The delay between gathering of and the throwing of stones is typically several hours. Okay, so that's just to kind of refute their future planning evidence, because it shows that animals do in fact have skills to plan for the future. On to the negative argument is that humans plan for the future based on a different motivational state. Once again, we are arguing on continuity. Animals can plan for the future. Motivational state or not does not matter. We have displayed evidence of mental continuity, and they have not displayed that animals actually plan for the. They have not disputed that animals actually plan for the future. Only the fact that humans are in a different motivational state. On to causal reasoning. They said that that animals lack reasoning because of qualitative differences between the two species, or between humans and other species. We're not saying that they have causal reasoning, as we already said during our cross-sex. We're saying that they have precursors. Just because they have a tiny little bit of any kind of causal reasoning or causal illusion in this case shows that there is continuity, because they have the same skills as a child in humans. Also, they dropped our cooking argument, so the app should win just on that, because therefore they concede to all of our cooking arguments, which show that chimps in fact do have the cognitive capabilities of humans when it comes to cooking. Also, on our empathy argument, two things here. Projecting selfishness is also anthropomorphism, because it's a human trait, which we kind of alluded to in our cross-sex. Also, it's hard to see motivation behind human behavior too. They could be lying, or you could just misread it. Also, you gave us the scientific data. We were waiting for you to read it because we knew that the card was going to come up. That rat opening the cage for the other rat is empathy, and even if it's a selfish even if it's for selfish reasons, like, if anything, that proves that the AF is right, because it shows that humans and animals both have selfish reasoning behind empathy, because we all know that humans sometimes act empathetically for selfish reasons. The AF should win because the neg failed to prove that animals don't have analogical reasoning. They also dropped the cooking argument, therefore conceding to all of our cooking arguments. And we should win because on the empathy argument, because selfish reasons exist in humans and animals. We should also win on the future planning argument because of that card about chimps storing rocks in the zoo exhibit, which shows that animals can plan several hours ahead. Thank you. Yeah, that's it.
We're gonna take her time. It's fine.
That's what it was supposed to be. Say our analogical response to your cooking. Say that. Do you need to charge it quickly? We can take like a 2-second break to charge it. So one says mental something. Do you know?
Okay.
Wait, yeah, I have to hear it. This thing?
Just give it to me.
Here it is. I'm good. That'll be fun to put on the internet.
Food, map, it's cake. I think it's okay. Anyone not ready? Okay. So for the K, they said the AF team said we were talking about degradation. We're just saying that what our K is basically saying is that just debating this topic brings other creatures besides humans to a less animalistic standing. So it's not necessarily degrading, but it's just saying we're putting animals at a lower standard than human being, and that actually affects the relationship between humans and animal. It affects how we view the importance of how humanity ties into other animals. So that argument about degradation doesn't actually link to our K. Now going on to the cooking card. They said that we dropped all of their cooking argument in the second speech. We did not, because they mentioned intellectual capabilities in animal, and we gave argument about analogical reasonings and how how animals cannot think like human beings. So we did not drop that argument, but also extend our Derek 15 card that explains that chimpanzees prefer cooked food and are willing to wait. This we extend this in the first speech, in the 1 and C. Even if they like cook food, that doesn't mean that they can actually cook. And during the cross-sex, I asked for the process of their studies. Are this animal actually imitating the experimenters? And they said yes. I also asked if imitation equals understanding. She said no. So even if they're imitating these experimenters, that doesn't mean they understand what these experimenters are doing. And that if they don't understand it, that does not lead to mental continuity. So that actually crosses out your argument. I also extend our Wannikin 15 card, which they actually never refuted. This card explains that chimpanzee cannot cook because their mental capabilities are not fully developed. They never said anything about this card specifically, and that actually strengthens the argument that I made earlier on. Now going on to causal reasoning. I think our Previoli 07 card that explains that animals do not have causal reasoning. Also, just even if you do not buy any of our arguments, our Darwin card from the our Penn et al. 08 card from the 1NC explains that there is no mental continuity in animal. They did not refute this card at all. So this covers both their cooking, empathy, and causal reasoning, that there is no mental continuity in animal, period. So this card is it says that there are fundamental discontinuities between animal and human beings that difference in kind, not degrees. Human have unique higher order reasoning that is not solely due to language, culture. Only human can reason inferently and use systematic structure. The apps also rely only on concrete and narrow conception of continuity to influence the importance of similarity. So even if you do not buy all of our audio argument, you should look into this card, because this actually refutes all of their argument and they totally drop this. So for all of this reason, I'm asking for nothing but a vote in nay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You hugging?
I'm sorry, I started it.
Good stuff.
I always love cross-examining with you guys.